Welcome to our Caregiving Club newscast. This is season 1, episode 6 for the week of April 20th, our second April episode for this month for news. I am Sherri Snelling, a gerontologist, author, and founder CEO of the Caregiving Club and host of this newscast. So we have got a lot to share with you for this episode. First of all, as you know, we have 4 different categories. We start off with Caregiver Wellness news. Now, April is still National Stress Awareness Month, but also at the end of the month, we're going to celebrate National Pet Therapy Day on April 30th. And this kind of brought forward so much of the science and studies that are out there that show that pet ownership is actually very healthy for us. It lowers blood pressure, it creates calm and lowers stress, and helps with mental health and all types of other really good health-based issues. But there's a recent poll that came out that we're going to share with you that is really pet ownership among older adults. And while there are still some very good positive links to longevity and health, there's also some considerations, particularly around finances, of being able to manage being a pet owner well into, our 80s and 90s and all of that. Also want to share with you a new tool that was recently launched for senior living residents through a company called Lifeloop, and it's a wellness index, basically. It's showing how well the residents of those communities are socializing and, kind of avoiding loneliness, which we know is a health risk, and some other things. It's a really interesting tool, and I wanted to bring it up because I'm hopeful that it will also migrate into the home care side of long-term care and caregiving, where so many of our seniors are really living at home, and can we use this tool as effectively there as we are in a lot of those communities? So that's another thing. And then finally, we wanted to, we don't dig into a lot of policy activity on this newscast. We leave that to the wonderful organizations like AARP and National Alliance for Caregiving and Family Caregiver Alliance and Caregiver Action Network. Those are the big ones, if you will, who are up on Capitol Hill advocating for family caregivers all the time. But every once in a while, we do see some legislation. Last episode, we shared with you legislation about a tax credit, which is really helpful for family caregivers. And we also wanted to do a shout out on another legislation that we saw that was tied to caregiver wellness. So we'll tell you more about that. And then moving on into our well home design section, we are going to give you some insights from financial guru Suze Orman. And she's talking about what are the risks of aging in place, which is, as we all know, that means living in your home as long as possible. And why do you need a plan? And then what is that plan? So I will take the baton from Suze, who talks about the risk, Susie, actually, who talks about the risk. And then I will walk you through some of the things to think about in terms of these forever home plans that we really need to start executing the minute we become homeowners, quite frankly. And decade after decade, there's going to be something new that we need to do to modify our homes so that it doesn't all fall in on us later in life, when we also have maybe less means in order to make some of these modifications and upgrades and all these other things. So we'll talk you through that. And then we're also going to go into the caregiving in the workplace. Now, I promised you last episode, I was on a webinar that I did. Actually, I participated with care.com and their Care for Business unit. They came out with a new report called The Future of Benefits, and it's all about workplace caregiving. So I'm going to share with you now those results. I wasn't able to share with you. I was under embargo, but I'll share with you some of those results and some of the discussion. And then also we're going to have a link to the webinar just for you, just for our audience here at Caregiving Club. So you can watch that and learn from all the experts on the panel and take a deeper dive into some of these different things that the report found. So that's really great. And then also there was another report that came out just recently from AARP and their Policy Institute, and it's called Valuing the Invaluable. They've done this now for many, many years. Every couple of years they bring it out. And it really talks about the societal value that family caregivers have to society. And oh, by the way, family caregivers are the largest workforce segment in the country. Amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and just cheers to all of our family caregivers who are providing that, the backbone of our healthcare system and our long-term care system, essentially. And then finally, when we turn to pop culture, this is really interesting. For those of you out there, you may be fans of a new show called The Pitt. It is all about ER doctors. It's a drama series on HBO Max. They just recently won a slew of Emmys, including the Best Drama Series and Best Actor for Noah Wyle, who, by the way, also happened to star in ER back in the day, which was one of my favorite shows. Anyway, they just finished season 2. And I wanted to talk about this because the whole season was building up to the finale that just dropped on HBO Max that you can watch. And it's all about caregiver burnout. And I think it was a really important message. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are out there that can help you if you're a caregiver suffering from burnout, because we know that it's both professional caregivers like those in The Pit, or at least the characters they're playing, but it's also the family caregivers as well. So that's going to be our pop culture segment for this episode. I also want to just remind you, do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Caregiving Club on YouTube. And you'll find all of these newscasts. You can go back and take a look at some of the newscasts we've done. You'll be able to see the self-care in 7 minutes videos that we have, little hacks on caregiver wellness, some of the free educational webinars that I've done, along with some other things. And also our podcast, Caregiving Club on Air, which actually is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Sirius XM and other channels. But we also do a video version that you can watch on our YouTube channel as well. So don't forget, hit that subscribe button, and then you will be notified every time we drop something new that hopefully helps you on your caregiving journey. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our Caregiver Wellness news. So for our Caregiver Wellness news, as I mentioned, April, of course, is National Stress Awareness Month. But also at the end of the month, on April 30th, we're going to celebrate National Therapy Day. Now, there are a lot of organizations out there, a lot of nonprofits and private organizations that do what they call, quote unquote, pet therapy. And this is where people who have special dogs and cats and sometimes rabbits that are specially trained, they bring them into nursing homes or assisted living, or they can even bring them into private homes. And, it's that therapeutic effect of pets and being able to just have them, sit lightly on you or pet them. It lowers your blood pressure, calms your stress, brings that stress response back into balance. It helps with anxiety and a whole lot of other things. And then as pet owners, we also know that there's a lot of benefits, right, to owning a pet. And so what was interesting is just this February, so a couple months ago, the University of Michigan, who manages a really great poll where they take a look at all kinds of different things about healthy longevity and living longer. And it's called the National Health, let's see, what's it called? The National Poll on Healthy Aging. Get it right there, Sherri. National Poll on Healthy Aging. So they do a deeper dive into a lot of different topics, and they revisit them to see how things have changed or what are the trends. And so a few years ago, they did one on pet ownership, particularly for people over the age of 50, going all the way up through people who are in their 90s and 100s. And they just revisited the poll, and some interesting things kind of came out. So the last one was done in 2018. This one, of course, was the poll was actually done last fall, methodology-wise, and they published it in February. But what they found is that over half of adults over the age of 50 are pet owners. Now, 70% of those pet owners have a dog. They're dog parents. And about 50% are cat lovers. And then, of course, there's lesser percentages that own maybe like horses or farm animals, or as I mentioned, rabbits or hamsters or things like that. Now, here's some stats that are really interesting that I think dovetail with the other studies, because there's been numerous studies, again, done on the therapeutic effect of pets on our health and our longevity. So this dovetails with that. 83% of pet owners over age 50 and older said their pets give them a sense of purpose. 71% said their pets help them enjoy life. Okay, I can certainly I fall into that category. My little puppy helps me enjoy life. It connects them with others. That's 70%. Makes them feel loved. 64%. Again, I'm a deep dive on that category, and reduces stress. And I think that's very true for my pet ownership and my little penny poo. That's 63%. He feel that. And, again, it helps you be physically active. It helps you stick to a routine. It helps you cope with a lot of the emotional side of life. Having that little warm, furry animal that you can hug and that'll listen to you without any kind of judgment, just with their eyes all looking at you with love. Those are all the wonderful things that we all know, those of us who are pet owners. So it's really fantastic. Now, here was what was interesting. This year's study versus the one they did about 5-7 years ago showed a little bit of a downslide on some of those things. So all those things I just mentioned to you with the statistics were actually lower, not significantly lower, but I would say lower by anywhere from 5 to 10% in each category than what they found in 2018. That may make some sense. 2018, we were kind of starting to go into the COVID era, right? And we know during the pandemic that I think it was 10 to 15% of older adults actually did adopt a pet during COVID because of the loneliness factor of not socially, interacting as much as we were being told to socially isolate. Never a good thing, but that's what we were told to do. So a lot of people got pets during that era. But the downside now is the financial cost. And we all know, I mean, we love our pets, but oh, yeah, I think my pet gets better health care than I do, actually. But 31% said it really puts a strain on their budget and it makes them consider that maybe once this pet passes, would they replace that pet as they are continuing to get older themselves? So very interesting kind of insights. I think the other things that certainly we have to think about as we get older, pets can become trip hazards in the home. I know my puppy tends to get in front of me a lot. So I'm constantly kind of leaping over her sometimes. You can go into assisted living with a pet in some instances. There's a lot of communities that will allow them, but there's going to be size limitations. Of course, you have to keep up with all the dog or cat's vaccines, and the staff will not care for those pets. Now, one caveat is Silverado, which is a memory care community. And they are on mostly East Coast and West Coast, I think, and in the Southwest. But they do have staff that will care for those pets. So that's an interesting twist. But most of these communities won't have staff do anything to help you take care of the pet. It's all on you or your family to help out with that. And some people have even said, not only is it a financial strain, but it's made me not take longer trips that maybe I wanted to take. And now that I'm older and I've got my bucket list, I'm looking at, hey, I really do want to go on that, 2-week trip to Scotland or India or wherever it is that, your dreams are going to take you. The other thing is that some older adults have even said they put off surgeries because they were fearful and couldn't find someone to come in and take care of their pet while they were recuperating in the hospital, or even when they came back home and they had to, go through rehabilitation and they weren't as strong. Having someone that could help them out with that became a real consideration for even going forward with the surgery. So yes, there are certain downsides, of course, that we have to think about, especially as we age, with our pets. And it's a balancing act, right? I mean, the benefits that you get, which are tremendous, balanced with, I know, some of the considerations that are out there. Now, one thought I had that's really interesting, and I don't know if this is really being brought up, but over in England, they are at the forefront of something in medicine called social prescribing. And what that means is rather than prescribing you a pill or a shot or whatever it is, it's actually prescribing to you, here are some social activities or social groups or social programs that you should take a look at that are going to help lower your heart rate, or your blood pressure, are going to help you with, the rehabilitation from your recent surgery or whatever it is, and not just physically based, but socially based, which is really interesting. And last year or 2 years ago, they did over 1 million social prescriptions for people living in the UK. And that is also starting to be seen here as a trend. We're a little bit further behind, but we do have a lot of benefits through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is called CMS. And CMS is now starting to reimburse certain companies and organizations for social programs that definitely are tied to, again, health outcomes. So there has to be a definite connection. It can't just be a correlation, as we call it in research and science. It's got to be causal, that particular social program actually helped reduce the overall healthcare cost of the individual who is in Medicare or Medicaid. But we are seeing more of this, right? And so I'm just wondering if the social prescribing that is the trend out there is taking a look at some of the pet therapy stuff, because what you could do is, again, even though you're older and it might get a little bit harder, particularly with some of the, some a pet like a dog, which needs walking, needs playtime, needs you to, the feeding and all that kind of stuff. They need, to be brushed out and all these other things. Could you, get a social prescription to have someone come in and help you with that? So that's going to be interesting. It'll be an interesting trend. But again, I think that we're going to take a look at all of the benefits. And as an alternative, there are, again, robotic pets. Now, I know that sounds like, oh, but it's harsh and metal and, kind of freaky and like a little robot or whatever. But I want you to, if you're interested in this, take a look or listen to our Caregiving Club on air podcast that we did with Ted Fischer, who is the founder and CEO of a company called Ageless Innovation. And they have a line of robotic pets called Joy for All Companions. They have dogs and cats, furry, wag their tails, purr, look up at you with those melting eyes. It's a nice alternative for people, particularly they do a lot with memory care and dementia adults who can't really remember to take care of their pets. And so this could be a nice alternative. So check that out. There's been some research done about, real versus robotic pets. But that was season 2, episode 7 with Ted Fischer from Ageless Innovation. Now, moving on into more wellness and communities, because I know, a lot of caregivers we are still actively involved with our loved ones, despite the fact that they've moved into assisted living, or that perhaps there was a need to put them into memory care. So, we're still caregivers, even though they are not at home under maybe our direct daily care. We are still very intimately involved in what's going on. So this is interesting. So Lifeloop, which is a company that creates programs and services and benefits, and then they feed these into their senior living community partners. So they can work with multiple, it's not just maybe Brookdale, or it's not just Silverado, or it's not just Sunrise. And I'm just throwing out some of the names that you might recognize there of some of these communities. They can work with all of them, actually. And I'm not sure what their client list looks like these days, but they're offering up a new tool into senior living, which is basically a wellness index tool. And it's mostly for staff. And what it does is it takes a look at each resident, and it starts to use the advanced technologies that show, okay, my mom was going to the yoga class every week for the last 6 weeks, but the last 3 weeks she's missed it. Why? Now, sometimes those things get lost, right? They're inside senior living, it's hectic. Staff, like everywhere, is overworked, if you will, managing every single resident. And you don't always take notes on, why did, Miriam not make it to the yoga class? Or, why did Joe drop out of the art classes that we were doing? He really loved those and came all the time, or whatever it is. And there isn't a direct indication like, okay, well, Joe's not been feeling well, or something else. So if it's not something really obvious, they don't have a whole lot of time to really dig into the details and keep those types of notes. Now they do. This particular tool is going to let them keep those types of notes and then help to figure out what's going on and how do we continue to enhance the quality of life for the resident in that community. Because one of the things, again, that we know, social isolation and loneliness, which are things that happen, particularly in our older population, can really affect our overall health, both physically and mentally. And so being able to understand what's going on, what is the cause of this, and sometimes it can be physical, sometimes it can be emotional, maybe something happened. But these are all the things that we can start to get more information around. And this is where technology can really come in, be really helpful. So it's called the Lifeloop Wellness Navigator. If your loved one lives in a senior living community, you may want to ask the staff or administrator, hey, are you guys aware of this? Or are you using something like this or this one in particular? Because, who knows if they have it or not, but maybe they've got something else that I haven't heard of. But this is really kind of a breakthrough because it is more wellness based rather than the physical symptoms, like making sure your loved one, is going to the bathroom at the right times, make sure they're getting a shower, make sure those are all a little bit more physical aspects. This is really much more based on your wellness, your social isolation, all the things that we look at from that perspective. So really interesting. And again, I'm always hopeful that things that do start in senior living, because it's a little easier to deploy these types of tools in organizations that have a setup where they've got numerous residents. It's a little harder to deploy those in home care because we're dealing with so many different individuals. We're also dealing with smaller agencies that are local. So we don't have as many of these big agencies that have, tons and tons of clients. We have a lot of local agencies who are taking care of our loved ones at home. But hopefully those things will migrate into the home care side of things where they can also be beneficial for those of us who are caring for loved ones at home. And then finally, I mentioned for our Caregiver Wellness News, wellness legislation. As I said, I'm not a policy wonk, so I don't like to touch politics. It's like a lightning rod, right? But every once in a while, something will come across my desk that I see or somebody sends to me, and I think, okay, I could get on board with that. I could go fight that on Capitol Hill, or I'm here in California, up in Sacramento, or whatever it is. And this is one that I think is really great. So it comes from Congressman Mike Lawler, who is a Republican from New York, and he introduced something called the Dreams Caregiver Health and Wellness Act. And this is legislation to establish a federal grant program to support the health, well-being, and retention of caregivers across the United States. Now, as I first read that, I thought, oh, it's for professional caregivers, right? Because retention of family caregivers. No, it's for family caregivers. This is definitely meant for the family members who are providing all this free care. And we're going to talk about that in a minute with the AARP report that just came out. But the value of providing all of this mostly home-based care that family members do give. And so these grants would be very specifically for the caregiver, because very often a lot of the legislation that we see is focused on the older adult benefits and programs and services that can help them, that the caregivers can tap into, but it's not about the caregiver themselves, right? This is about the caregiver themselves, regardless of who you're caring for or what the situation may be. This is something that could help you. And so these grants would, whether it was free meal delivery, transportation that you may not have, caregiver support such as mental health services, just talking to someone, whether it's like a telehealth or a teletherapy, or getting the cost of respite care so that you can go to a support group. So it's really creative and innovative. There's a lot of different ways you might be able to tap into these grants. Obviously, they would be managed by one or more organizations that would deliver the grants across the country, but it's a good first step, and I applaud Congressman Lawler and everybody who supports this and recognizes that we have to care for the caregivers as much as the caregivers are caring for their older loved ones, right? There's a balancing act there, and I'm glad to see that there's a lot more attention and spotlight being put on those things. So with that, let's now go to our Well Home Design News segment. In Well Home Design News, as we know, April is National Healthy Home Month, and we shared a lot of really great stuff with you last episode about decluttering and some other things. This time we're going to focus on a little bit of the financial side of those healthy forever homes, and I wanted to start with something I came across with our financial guru, Suze Orman. And I said Suze, it's Suze Orman. I should know that. I interviewed her for my book, my first book, A Cast of Caregivers. And hopefully maybe one of these days we'll get her back on the podcast. But anyway, I came across an interview that she did at a couple of different conferences and events. One was sponsored by Forbes, and she was talking about how this whole concept of aging in place, which is an industry term that people use in long-term care and senior living, that means you want to live in your home as long and independently and safely as possible. So aging in place. She talked about the risks of really doing that without a good plan. And I love the fact that of all people, Suze Orman can get our attention, right? I love the fact that she brought this up, because very often we see, studies that show, or surveys that show, 7 or 8 or 9 out of 10 Americans over the age of 65 want to stay living in their homes as long as they can. Even though, of course, a lot of the senior living communities, the assisted living, the memory cares, the life plan communities are gorgeous. They're like resorts now. It's like going to the Four Seasons for the rest of your life, which is not a bad thing if you've got the money. But that's the whole point. A lot of people know, oh, well, we certainly have to have money saved up in order to move into one of those senior communities that's maybe on the higher end or offers a few more amenities or whatever. That we don't think about it when we choose to stay at home. We just think, yeah, we're just going to stay here and it's all going to be good. And what Suze is saying is, you still need money. You still need a plan. And so let me just share with you some of the things that came out of her comments on a couple of these panel discussions that she was on at these conferences. So first of all, she talked about a Boston College study that found that sellers in their 80s, so if you're selling your home in your 80s, you're actually earning 5% less than if you were selling your home in your 40s. And it's because, she said, deferred maintenance and outdated features, because someone in their 40s who flips a home, maybe after 5 years and grades, the home they were probably living in probably had certain modern amenities, whereas somebody in their 80s who hasn't updated their home, who it's still a home that was built in the 1970s, which we know 32% of all homes, of the 100 million homes in the US, are still 1970s style, haven't been upgraded. And so you're not going to get as much, because any buyer is looking at that saying, gosh, I got to put at least 100 grand or more, maybe 150 grand or more. And if it's California, it's 300 grand into this house to make it what I need it to be to fit a modern lifestyle. So she said the gap on a $400,000 home can mean a $20,000 loss. And this underscores the importance of being proactive in upkeeping your home as part of your retirement plan. So, which I love, and it's something we talk a lot about in gerontology. What is that forever home plan? And we're going to get to that in a minute. So she said, if you invest early in maintenance and affordable long-term care coverage and making certain, universal design accessible, safety changes and modifications in the home, it is going to not only help your independence to stay there, but it's also going to help your financial stability. And she said the premiums for long-term care insurance have risen about 40% since 2020, making early planning critical to avoid financial strain. So again, if you're looking at getting long-term care insurance, those premiums and those plans are going up. And so you want to make sure that you're not going to wait too long on your home. If you have to invest in that long-term care plan, you have to also put an investment plan together to upgrade your home. Um, so I love this quote from her. I wanted to share this. For you to have money, you have to learn to live below your means, but within your needs. Okay, that is just that should be like on, I don't know, freeway advertising. It should be everywhere because it's so true. So many of us live beyond our means and beyond our needs, right? Or what we think are our needs, if we're really truthful. And I think I've learned that the older I've gotten, I look at some of the things that I bought in my 30s and 40s and think, what was I thinking? And it's very therapeutic to be now decluttering. I told you on the last episode, I'm doing my Swedish death cleaning. And I love it. It's feeling good, but also it's just like getting rid of the stuff. It lifts you up. It just makes you feel lighter. And it's a good lesson learned that I wish we could pass on to younger generations. Just don't buy the stuff. You're going to feel so much better throughout life if you just don't buy too much stuff. But for those of you who are fans like me of HGTV, almost every single home that they go in to modify who has kids, there's so much kid stuff in every single room, right? That's the thing they find. They've got to create all this storage to hide all of the toys and everything else going on. And, get your kids outside into nature. That's what I say. That would be better than all those toys and stuff. So that's my tip. But anyway, I wanted to start off with that because it is such a great thing that we need to think about, strategy, if you will, for our longevity. It's a part of our longevity. Where we live, our environmental wellness, and this is from my Me Time Monday book, is so critical to our overall health, happiness, and longevity in life. Our environments really do play a huge role. And you hear me talk about that all the time on the podcast and on these newscasts. So let's segue now to, okay, Susie is telling us you got to invest, you got to have a plan, you got to pour some money into that house if you want to stay in it and have it, work for you. So what is that? What does that look like? So as I mentioned, there is, and I'm going to have, we'll put one of the slides from a webinar that I do on just this whole home makeover. We go room by room. It's like my version of HGTV, but we do a webinar on how to modify your home, and not just to make it safe and accessible, which is like, that's the earlier era of universal design. That's where we've been for a few decades now, of making sure things, homes accommodate us, whether we're in a walker or a wheelchair, or we have chronic illness and joint pain and all these other things. That's universal design. We're now evolving into a whole new era, as I've talked about, of neurodesign. So it goes really beyond the safety and accessibility factors, and it goes more into how does your brain interact with your environment in terms of helping you with emotional health, mental wellness, some of these other issues that we have that we know our environments can play a big role in. So now we're into a narrow design era that embraces all of it, right? But what we'll do is I'll put one of the slides from my webinar up on the screen so you can see it. Essentially, now we know that the average homeowner is in their 40s when they purchase their first home. It's a decade later than where we were a few years ago, where the first home purchase was in their 30, in your 30s, which I would fall into that. I think I was 32 when I bought my home. And thank God I did, because I could not afford it today. But anyway, so if you're in your 40s and you buy this home, and we're going to hope that most homes that you're buying have some upgrades, have some of the modern amenities. They're not necessarily this group of homes that we were talking about that were built in the 1970s or even maybe 1980s and haven't been upgraded since, because there's so many new, regulations, and it's not up to code. And I mean, it can get really expensive if your home is a lot older and hasn't been maintained by the former homeowner. But all that said, you've got to assess your home from that perspective. And then from that point on, you are looking at home maintenance. Now, there's the typical home maintenance, right? There's things like, okay, we've got to repair the roof. It's leaking, or we need, a new air conditioning heating system, or whatever it is. There's things like that that are just kind of that's part of home ownership. You've got to take care of, pipe leaks for your plumbing. I've had a couple slab leaks, over the years with my home and all that. That's just part of home ownership. But what we're talking about is more purposeful, more proactive along the lines of this universal design, neurodesign. So every decade, we know that things are starting to possibly decline. And let me just take you through some examples, okay? And then again, I'll have access to that webinar because we're going to do a neurodesign webinar. I think I promised that to you last newscast episode, and this will be part of it. So in your 40s and 60s, so that's a 20-year period, right? Your eyesight is starting to go. As we said, you need 3 times the amount of light at age 60 that you needed at age 20. So you're going to need to improve your lighting system. That would be something I'd look at. And again, you want to make sure you're maintaining your clutter, because eyesight that's your mental health. When the clutter is around you, as we talked last episode, you are creating a stress response. Your hearing is also starting to maybe go a little bit. So this is where you want to get maybe some smart technology, whether it's the smart doorbells, those are both for safety, but also you hear it, or it can vibrate on your phone. So you don't have to be on the second floor in your home, in the back doing laundry, and you're not hearing the doorbell. That's probably pretty common, right? Well, now that you have these smart technology systems, you have it right on your phone. You know right away somebody's, at the doorbell or left something for you, whatever. That's hearing. Sore muscles and joint pain. This is where people are looking at tubs and showers. If you want to keep a tub, do you want to upgrade it to a hydrotherapy walk-in tub? A lot of people are looking at that. We always think about those for just seniors, but actually they're for really the weekend warriors who have aching pains and joints and want both the hydrotherapy and also the color. There's different colored lights and stuff that can help with some muscle repair and cellular repair. Or do you want to take your shower, or do you want to take your tub out because it's, it's getting harder to get over the ledge, if you will, of that tub, and you just want a no entry, zero entry type shower, which eventually, if you are in a walker or wheelchair, is going to allow you easy access into that beautiful new shower you're going to create. Okay. Ages 60 to, let's say, 75, lots more chronic pain going on. Also arthritis. This is where you want to start to change out all of the holes for cabinets and shelves in your home, and they should mostly be what we call the D ring. Now, the D ring is the loop that looks like a D, and it's easier if you've got arthritis because your hands do gnarl up a little bit. The fingers don't straighten out, and they don't come together as easily to pull a little knob. So you want to change it to a D ring so that you can then get your hands behind that and pull that out easily. Now, I say D, there's a lot of beautiful hardware now, and it is more of a long rectile. That would work, rectangle, rectile, rectangle. That would help as well, but you definitely want to change those out. You also want to change any of your faucets or your doors to not twisting your wrist, because again, with arthritis or osteoporosis and some of the other issues that happen with joints, it is really painful to twist a wrist just to get a door open. So what you want to do is change all those out to lever handles and make it really easy on yourself, okay? You have less strength, so this is where you want to get the pull-out shelves. You don't want to have to get down on your knees and search in the back for that pot that you need. You don't want to have to get up on a ladder in your closet and get at the highest level, the pants that are hanging up there. You want one of those things where you pull down and it brings the pants or the shirts or whatever down, so that what we think about when you're in your ages 60 to 75 is when we're changing things in the home, we call it knees to nose. Everything has to be accessible with your hands between your nose and your knees. So reaching above your nose, no good. Reaching down below your knees where you have to crouch or get on your knees to get something down way low, no good. So everything really has to live within that nose to knees, if you will, kind of spectrum where you can pull things out easily. Okay, balance issues we're starting to see as we get older. So we want to be careful about rugs. Got to make sure they're really well taped down, or possibly remove them and have some alternative. Also, maybe think about things like chair rails if it meets with your decor, or what are the things that you can do so that if you're walking and you're off balance in your hallway, you can kind of balance yourself and not just have it be a flat wall. And also, I talk about this in my Me Time Monday book, but it's going to be a big, big feature in my next book that I'm working on called The Snug Home, is which I call the 5 C's. It's curves. Everything has to have a nice soft curve, whether it's a counter, a chair, couch, whatever it is, because your balance is off. Your skin is also thinner as you age. You bump into something, you're going to have a nice little bruise there. Okay, ages 75 to 95 and beyond. Cognitive slowing or decline. Okay, so we want to do things where we still feel we can be social in our home. We can still invite people over, and make sure that we're not getting that social isolation, because that helps a lot with our cognitive activity, if you will. We also want to possibly look into making sure we've got the right technology so that we can do some of the brain games, or brain exercises, I should say, because games are not as good as exercises, but do the brain exercises. And then also, you have less stamina. So you need to think about stairs in your living. If your living is on the highest level and it's really hard to get up and down the stairs, a couple things you need to think about. One, making sure that the stairs have handrails on both sides. And if not, maybe it's an elevator, or moving all of the living to one level that's down below that's easier, and then bringing the storage upstairs. And then, other things like med tech, like managing your medications through little technology products and things that are out there now that can really help. So those are all the things that I thought were really interesting and that we have in our Forever Home checklist. And then just really quickly, I came across some smart lighting for the home. It is AI-driven technology lights. It's from a company called Nobi, and it's, we know that 62% of falls happen at night. And so when the person in bed rises and the lamp is above you, let's say, it will automatically come on with you. You don't have to press anything. You don't have to say anything to Siri or Alexa or anybody else. The light just automatically kind of awakes with you. And then it's also taking in when these things are happening through AI and that data intelligence, so that it can help to track you and let you know, okay, here are the things that are happening. It also can detect falls, because that's a huge issue. We know 1 in 4 seniors fall in their home every year. And then it has two-way voice communication if there is an emergency event. And it has privacy protection by blurring your image. It doesn't show you as a fallen person and the position that you're in. It will show like kind of an outline of a body, if you will, and what positions it's in, so that it keeps your personal information private. And then, it helps. They're doing this a lot again in senior living, because it's helping the professional caregivers and the staff know, oh, emergency, something's happened. let's call it up on our phones or our app or whatever we're using. And then, immediately, okay, I've got to get over there right away. They haven't responded and it looks like they're down. But you can also use them in the homes. Now, the questions I had that weren't really answerable on their website, and I didn't get a chance to call the company before I did this newscast, but here would be the questions I would ask. First of all, does it have amber lighting for nighttime? Is it smart enough to know daytime that you got up? Maybe you took a nap during the day, but it's still light out and you got up, versus it's nighttime, it's dark, and you got up because you need to go to the bathroom. Does it have circadian rhythm lighting so that that lighting is amber instead of a blue light emission, which, as we know, I've talked about this before, the blue light emission will tell your brain to wake up. The amber light will keep you in more of that sleep mode. So that was a question. Is it okay for just one person, or can you have it for two people? Like, for instance, how would it understand the difference between, your mom versus your dad, in terms of who it's tracking and all that? Can it light a pathway to the bathroom? Because while the light in the bedroom is great, and again, if it's a blue light emission, it's going to wake everybody up and it's going to be very bright. But if it's an amber light, does it cast still enough light to guide you into the bathroom safely? Um, and then, is it also sensitive enough because it does detect falls? Does it know if you're just pushing yourself up in bed and rolling over because you've got like a hurt shoulder or muscle and you have to be really careful? And sometimes we have to almost like get get up a little bit and turn ourselves over, which is not really getting up. So what I would hate to have happen is, let's just say you're doing that sensitive, I'm going to roll over to my side and all of a sudden the lights go on. It's like, no, 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 I'm sleeping. Just taking me a little longer to get over on my side. So that would be something that I definitely would also ask about. Yeah. So anyway, so though that was an interesting product, I think that's the wave of the future. We're going to see a lot of these AI based intelligent data and metrics, that are going to help us hopefully live safely, more independently, and more healthfully at home. But they are still very much in their infancy. And the one thing I would say, having, worked a lot in this space of age tech with a lot of entrepreneurs and startup companies, is we're reaching saturation on subscriptions. Everything in our life is a subscription. We have subscription fatigue. All the entertainment, all the technology stuff that we're using, everything needs a subscription. And at some point, you're going to cost yourself out of the game with a lot of older adults who are on fixed incomes because they just cannot afford to adopt all these independent subscriptions on a monthly basis and make it work with their budget. So it's going to hit a wall for a lot of these companies, and we're going to have to think through what is, what makes the most sense. Or there's only going to be one or two really, really absolutely necessary subscriptions that you need, and everything else is going to drop by the wayside. And that would be sad because there are a lot of really great solutions out there, but we just aren't going to be able to afford every single one of them. Anyway, with that, let's move into our caregiving in the workplace. For our caregiving in the workplace segment, I am going to follow up from the tease that I gave you in our last newscast about the care.com Care for Business unit. They have a report called The Future of Benefits, and they conduct this annual survey. They've been doing it now for, I think, 6 years. And what they do is they ask a certain number of HR benefit managers as well as employees, what are the things that are going to help you the most as a caregiver who is working? And so the definition of caregiver being whether you're a parent all the way through, are you caring for parents, in-laws, or grandparents? So it's along kind of what we call the life course or lifespan, throughout that whole different life stages. If you're caring for someone, you fit into that category. And every year is really interesting. They get some really great responses. Some things dovetail with other reports and studies that are out there, and some things are really new. So I was really honored to be asked to be on their panel of experts as they presented these results to a community of employers. And it was open to everybody, but mostly I think that a lot of their clients and other employers were listening in on this, particularly the HR departments and the HR benefit managers and others that are out there that really focus on this space. So I wanted to just share with you some of the highlights, uh, excuse me, of this. First of all, I will have a link to the actual webinar, the video that was recorded, and it's on Vimeo. And Care.com gave me authorization to share that with the Caregiving Club members and people who watch our newscast. So I was really happy about that. We also know that, about 81% of employers have now required a lot of their employees to return to the office, whether it's full Monday through Friday or at least some type of a hybrid where maybe it's a 3-day work week and the other 2 days, you can work from home. So there's a little flexibility there. But concurrently, I think because of what was seen during the pandemic, a lot of employers have recognized the certain needs that their employees have, particularly if they're caregiving, or have they? Because that's one of the big things out of this report is there's still a gap, guys. There's still a little bit of a, what would you call it? A canyon size gap in some of these responses on what employers think they're providing that's good and what employees say, yeah, but you know what, I really want this or I really need this or whatever it is. And then, of course, we all know that this isn't just 9 to 5 office workers. We have, a huge part of our population. I think it's like 80 million or more workers are hourly or shift workers. So we know that there's a lot of folks that are in the service industry, also a lot of people who are self-employed, or who are entrepreneurs. And so there's just a lot of different workplaces that we need to look at in order to have a holistic picture of what's happening with caregivers in the workplace. So just a couple of things that, and one other thing too is that, and this dovetails with other surveys that have been out there, is that more than half of employees say they would stay loyal and stay working or be attracted to a new company that offered senior care benefits. That's really becoming an essential part of their, okay, I know I have a benefit package. This is on my checklist. And so that's very interesting because it's becoming more and more of a value for those employees, and employers need to pay attention to that. So the part that I talked a little bit about, and I'll have some of these statistics from their report up on the screen for you while you're watching this on YouTube. But, we talked about how there is a shift now in the workplace, and it isn't just about parents caring for children. We're shifting now to childcare, to elder care, in that recognizing that, again, across the lifespan, across our lives, we're going to be caring for probably a variety of people. So if you start off with parents and then you start to go, down the longevity age slide here, you could be caring for a spouse or a partner or a sibling. Many of us have siblings who never married or don't have children, and they may need our help. I know I'm going to be in that category. My brother's already prepared for it. But, there's a lot of people out there that are solo agers. And then we move into, again, caring more for parents or in-laws, or parents and in-laws at the same time. We see that with a lot of working couples, or even caring for grandparents. And you can be a Gen Z or a younger millennial and maybe still have a parent or grandparent to care for, even though you haven't started your own family. So it's really all over the spectrum. And I think, again, it's really important to know that creates a lot of challenges for employers to recognize, okay, this is hitting, we know that 1 in 3 employees, according to a Harvard report from a couple of years ago, 1 in 3 are caring for children, 1 in 5 are caring for older adults. Okay, it could be larger than that because a lot of people don't also like to self-identify as caregivers, which is one of the things that we talked about. If you're a wife, you don't call yourself a caregiver, you call yourself a wife. Very often, if you're an adult daughter or you're an adult son, you don't call yourself a caregiver for mom or dad. So the word caregiver, even though it is starting to be more recognized, and I see it being embraced more by parents, actually, whereas those of us who have been in this space now for 20 plus years, have always more assigned it to the senior care part of caregiving. But really, I think caregiver is being used across the spectrum to define anybody that you are caring for and, that's under your care and all of that. So anyway, so what we found is that, again, almost 40%, 37% of employees are not self-identifying as a caregiver. That's going to make communication challenging. So one of the things, of course, to think about as an employer is you can use the words caregiver and caregiving, but if you're writing a headline and you're going to do a webinar and you want to really grab attention, I think it has to be more of caring for an older parent, or just make it, or caring for an older parent or spouse, make it more specific so people see themselves in the content or the education you're going to provide or the messaging or the benefit, the program, whatever it happens to be. We have to be, I think, a little bit more explicit in connecting the roles that people already do see themselves in, and it's not always caregiver. We also know that almost 3 in 4 millennials are caring for at least one child, and 52% of employees are the sandwich generation, caring for 2 generations. There you go, kids and older parents, same time. So they're really squeezed. And so things are really changing. One of the things I talked about, you'll see if you watch the full webinar, is a lot of the data that's out there for employers and for benefit managers is the loss of productivity from a caregiving employee because they do have to take time off for emergencies or get mom and dad to follow up doctor appointments or whatever it happens to be, right? So there's this loss of productivity. And we also talk about if an employee makes a decision to leave the workforce voluntarily, take some time off, a leave of absence so that they can care for a loved one. We have to be realistic about that because very often that care is not just a few weeks or even a few months. The average is 4.5 years. And if you're caring for someone with dementia, the average is 9 years, but it could be 20 years that you're caregiving. So you don't want to maybe leave work that long. You're thinking it's just going to be 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is, and it's not. So we have to think that through very thoughtfully. And we have to figure out ways, how do we help you maintain the balance of work and then the new responsibilities of caregiving that you have while doing that and not have to give up a lot of this stuff, knowing it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. But there's a talk too about a lot of caregiving employees and caregivers in general. We talk about this is why caregiver wellness is such a big piece of what I do. We do drop the ball that says me. We do drop the self-care activities. We do drop the social outings and getting to the gym or eating more nutritiously because we just don't have time. And that makes it really difficult and really challenging. So what are the ways that employers can connect their corporate wellness programs with caregiving? If you're offering free yoga class after work hours, let's say it's a 9 to 5 more situation, and you're going to offer a free yoga class, well, caregivers can't participate in that because they've got to hurry home for all the people that they're caring for and take care of all of those things. So is there a way to offer the class online so they could take it on demand when they had a pocket of time? Or things like that. So we need to kind of like put a caregiving lens on the benefits that are being looked at because we have to really think through, is this going to work for the caregiving population that we know really needs this wellness probably more than anybody? And then also there's talk about, okay, because you do have that drop of self-care, not taking as much care for yourself, maybe not doing your doctor appointments. Now your healthcare costs may go up, and that's going to cost me, the employer, more. So all of these things are negatives, right? Lost productivity, higher healthcare costs, all these other issues that are going on, and it's all negative. So one of the things that I would love to see if we can do is to flip the script on that type of outlook and make it more positive, because there was a study that I think it was in last episode, I talked about this, that talked about the skills that caregivers are, obtaining from being a caregiver that are going to be hugely needed in the workplace. Things like patience, things like collaboration, things like being able to research stuff, being able to navigate, a fragmented or really difficult, scenario or system, being creative about problem solving, having more empathy. All of these things are really huge skills now that a lot of employers are looking for in people that might get promoted, people who they are trying to attract into their workplace. So we need to think about the caregivers generating those skills and being really good at that. And also, if we can connect the wellness programs to them, we will keep them healthy. If we can give them more flexibility just for this period of time, that they're in their caregiving chaos, if you will, the eye of the storm, um, then, they're going to be loyal. Those aren't employees that are going to leave you if you stuck with them through the caregiving crisis of their life, right? So all of these things are really, I think, let's flip the script. Let's look at the things that we can do that are going to be beneficial, and let's start maybe even surveying and researching some of those things. And as I said, no one size fits all. Recognizing that people are shift workers or service workers and or hourly workers, and they don't have that traditional, it's not like if you have an office job and you don't show up, maybe one of your colleagues or your supervisor can step in and kind of take care of whatever was needed for that day, or it's just not a big deal that you weren't there for that day or whatever. Well, that doesn't happen if you're working in retail, or you're a waitress or you're a truck driver or whatever. It's like you got to be there. So how do we address that? How do we deal with that? What are the other things we could give those types of workers that would really help them? And I was part of a work group that looked at this, and one of the things that we found is, well, it's the gift of time. We know that caregivers spend a lot of time researching things online after a doctor's appointment, or if therapies are needed or medications are assigned or prescribed or whatever. They spend a lot of time looking that stuff up. Could we give them an expert that they could talk to who does all the research for them, or who answers their questions for them, so they don't have to spend hours on the internet and not even knowing if they're finding the right thing, right? So that could be something that could be really helpful, and that could actually help caregivers even if they're not shift hourly workers. That could help every caregiver. So those are some things. And then the stress disparity was a big one. The other panelist, I think it was I can't remember if it was Wes or John, who from care.com, who spoke to this, but that employers think that they are giving the right benefits, the right programs to support their employees. But unfortunately, the employees who are caregivers are saying, yeah, it's not really helping. And so, employers estimate that about 55% of them say, yeah, my employees might be stressed from caregiving. 81% of the employees who are caregivers saying, we're stressed. So that's a 30% deficit. There's the canyon for you that we've got to cross. We've got to bridge that divide. And the support isn't keeping up. Only 19% of employees feel that their needs as caregivers are being well recognized. Well, that's a value statement. That's a see me, hear me, help me, right? That is what caregivers need from their employer. See me, hear me, help me. And no, we know you can't do everything. We know you can't fix all this for me, but recognize me and the struggles I'm having and the challenges I'm facing. Give me an outlet. Maybe it's a support group. Maybe it's I talked a little bit about ERGs, the employee resource groups. Maybe it's, whatever, but, help me and understand me and let me know that, yeah, I am valuable to you. I'm not just going to be seen as this unproductive, person that figure out a way to replace them with AI, right? I mean, that's a big fear for everybody anyway. And only 20% of employees feel very supported when caregiving needs affect their work. That was a huge one, I think, from this survey that care.com did. That's big, that they don't feel supported. That means more training, right? That means you've got to get everybody from the C-suite down. You've got to get the managers and supervisors and mid-level executives involved in this, so that they can have that empathy and emotional intelligence when somebody is a caregiver, and not have them feel lesser than, because quite frankly, they're keeping the healthcare system going for you. So, we got to keep that in mind, right? So anyway, I will have those. You are seeing them as I talk through them. You can have access to the full webinar, which I think is really cool. So thank you, care.com and the Care for Business team for doing this. And then the other thing that came out that kind of affects the workplace and society in general is AARP every few years does something called Valuing the Invaluable Report. And it's a really great report where they take a look at all the unpaid hours that family caregivers are providing to the healthcare system, to the long-term care system. What is the value of that? How do we address that as a society? Because as I've said over and over and over, family caregivers are the largest volunteer healthcare army in the country. 63 million Americans are caring for a loved one. That's huge. That's way bigger than our military today and any other probably, work group that you can think of. And in fact, AARP did say that the family caregivers are America's largest workforce. So, or one of them anyway. So what they found, and this went up from about 640 billion from a few years ago, if I recall correctly, to over $1 trillion. That is what family caregivers are worth. Wouldn't it be nice to cash in on that? That'd be lovely. But unfortunately we can't. But it's a clarion call to legislators and policymakers and nonprofits and employers and anybody out there who recognizes and relies on family caregivers to show up and do their other jobs or their other roles in life and society, knowing they've got this caregiving full-time experience that they're also struggling with. It really is important. And I think it's important also that, again, when I talk about caregivers, I talk about this volunteer healthcare army. You've got no boot camp. You have no pay. You have no benefits, like, all the veterans who come home and they get lovely benefits and hopefully some help. None of that happens for family caregivers. We got to change that. We just have to change that. We have to recognize this is a role most of us will play. Somehow we're going to need some kind of support doing all of it, right? And the biggest topic in this kind of area, and the reason why I love that AARP keeps bringing these reports out, and of course we keep seeing higher and higher numbers, higher and higher value for family carers, is there's something called the forgotten middle. There's been, again, surveys and studies that have been done on the forgotten middle. The forgotten middle are basically probably most of us who are listening to this and who are out there. And what that means is you and your loved one have not or cannot necessarily qualify to get Medicaid, which would be the free aid administered by the state, but funded by the federal government and our tax dollars. You can't qualify. You've got to pay way down. You have to impoverish yourself basically to qualify. And we're not making enough money that, hey, no sweat, I can get concierge medicine and med jets and all this kind of stuff. And, we got no problem over here. And, I go back to Suze Orman, who was in our last segment we just talked about on aging in place. Suze Orman, because she's a financial wizard, she had two brothers who were living in Chicago. And her mom was living in Chicago. And I think at the time, Susie was in California. Can't remember where she is now. And her mom needed to move into assisted living. So she found a really great place in Florida, which she thought would be better for her mom, just, the weather and all kinds of other things. And I think Susie maybe have already or had a summer home there or something. Anyway, she moved her mom. She moved her into a wonderful facility at the time. This is over 15 years ago. But she also hired extra staff because she knew in these communities, it's not 24/7. We think it is, but there isn't enough staff to sit there and watch your mom while she sleeps and make sure she doesn't get up to go to the bathroom and she falls. They are taking care of multiple residents and they're having to, triage emergencies that may happen with somebody else or whatever. So Susie recognized that she hired her own full-time staff. So she had around 8-hour shifts of people that would come in and supplement the staff, which was really interesting. And I think at the time, very unique. I don't know if they allow you to really even do that anymore. But anyway, because she can afford it. Most of us can't. We can't do that. We might not even be able to afford to get mom or dad into assisted living if they don't have any savings or long-term care insurance, right? So these are all the things that the forgotten middle is really getting crushed. It's like the sandwich generation. There's caregiving and then there's the sandwich generation. There's, caregiving costs and then there's the forgotten middle. So we've really got to start to pay attention. I like to see a lot of these legislators starting to recognize it's not just about childcare. And this is not to denigrate childcare because it's important, but listen up, folks. We crossed the Rubicon in about 15 states this year where we have more people over the age of 65 than children under 18. By 2032, that's going to be true across the U.S. First time in our U.S. history, more older people than younger people. So we've got to get it together when we think about longevity and we think about the bonus years of life, but not all of them maybe lived in great health. That's the health span, lifespan equation, right? And then there's the wealth span you throw in there. We've got to think about how do we help the forgotten middle through some of these things, because it's going to get it's definitely going to get tough. So tax credits, flexible type situations at work, getting a little help maybe from work in our employers, maybe that care navigation guide, getting a guide. And then don't overlook the burnout, because we want to keep that balance for our family caregivers so that they don't hit burnout, that they can practice some of the wellness things that are offered to them or available, or just do their own self-care and find that time is really key. And it's interesting, we're going to end on burnout because now we're going to go into our pop culture segment, which is all about this new TV show, The Pitt, and the lessons that we all learn about caregiving and burnout. For this episode's pop culture segment, we're going to turn to television again. And I wanted to talk about a show that some of you may be watching. It's on HBO Max and it's called The Pitt. And the premise of the show is it takes, 10, 12, 13 episodes, I guess, or so. And it looks at just one full day in an emergency room in a county hospital in Pittsburgh. And it's called The Pitt for a couple of different reasons, which you find out during the show. But it's really interesting because it shows you hour by hour during a 15-hour shift that many of these hospital physicians and nurses go through, the stresses, the strains, the different kinds of cases that they have and all that kind of stuff. It's a really great show. And it's also gotten a lot of kudos. They just won the Outstanding Drama Series, and its lead actor, Noah Wyle, who many of you, if you're like me, remember Noah when he first started in ER, a very similar situation, right? In ER, but a very different show back in the 90s. But he's the lead here. He plays Dr. Robbie, even though his name is Rabinovich. So he won Best Actor. Catherine Lenaza, I think, won Best Supporting Actress, and then Sean Hatezi won Best Guest Appearance on a Drama Show. So they had quite a few kudos, and they've also, though, more importantly, I think, received some kudos from the particularly the hospital acute care sector, and a lot of the ER docs and nurses that are out there saying, yeah, they're really getting it right. They're showcasing certainly a lot of the stressors, a lot of the things that happen. The procedures are pretty well done. They've really obviously got great consultants on the show. Now, it is, of course, entertainment. So some of the drawbacks are, well, things don't happen that fast. Well, yes, but it is a show. They have to show you things in just 1 hour, right? So there's a little bit of knocks on some of that. But for the most part, I think they're getting really great kudos from people who actually live these lives, and then also from certainly the entertainment industry. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about, and let me just do a shout out to one of the other actors on the show. It's a great ensemble cast, by the way, fantastically cast. And Taylor Dearden is, she plays one of the residents, and she is neurodivergent in the show. And if I'm correct, I think she's also neurodivergent in real life, but She plays a neurodivergent doctor on the show who is also caregiving for her sister who has, to me, it looks like an intellectual developmental disability, something like Down syndrome. Now, the show notes say that her sister is also on the autism spectrum, but I just, in watching the actress who's playing the sister, she just seems to me like to be more what I would find with Down syndrome, but I'm not going to argue with it. But Taylor Dearden is fantastic. And oh, by the way, she is a little bit of a Nepo baby. There's a couple of them on the show. The other one is, forget her name, Fiona Dourif, I think, who plays one of the other residents. So she's the daughter of Brad Dourif, great character actor. You wouldn't know him by his name, but he's been in just about everything. And the minute you see him, he's very recognizable and he's really great. And then Taylor Dearden's dad is Bryan Cranston, Breaking Bad and other great shows. So anyway, getting a little off on tangent there, but what I really want to focus on is they just finished and had the finale for season 2. And so again, 15 hours in the day of a life, right? And in the first season, we learned that Dr. Roby, played by Noah Wiley, Dr. Robbie, sorry, is he's suffering from depression. He's suffering from PTSD through what he went through during COVID, which obviously was years ago, but he's still triggered by a lot of those emotions because he lost his mentor, wasn't able to save him during COVID. And he has some other issues as well. So he's kind of spiraling down. But in the first season, he was a pretty strong leader. He certainly continues to be a strong leader, but we're watching the spiral during the whole course of the season. And the finale is really pretty amazing because we finally hear him really start to articulate that he has these issues and he is planning on taking a 3-month sabbatical, but it's a really risky solo motorcycle trip across the country to then go do like some vision quest kind of thing. And a lot of his colleagues are concerned with him. So through the course of that finale, all these different colleagues are talking to him in different ways about recognize this. What can I do to help? Make sure you know what you're thinking, and all that kind of stuff. Now he does express suicidal ideation, and I just want to do a little shout out or a little pause here for people who are having thoughts of suicide or contemplating it or are fearful that they might go there. They're on that ramp that is leading you to that. Please reach out for help. We're going to put this up on the screen, but 988 is your emergency lifeline number, and you can do chat and you can do phone call with professionals who will help you, talk you through what you're feeling and help you. And that's the most important thing. So I just wanted to say that as we start talking about this part of the show where he is starting to talk about suicide. I mean, he makes a comment to one of his colleagues, I don't know if I want to be here anymore, but he doesn't mean the hospital, because then he goes on to explain that the ER, the Pitt, which he oversees, by the way, as the attending physician, is his life. It's his passion. It's his purpose. But outside of that, he's got nothing. And he's fearful of that. He had dreams. He wanted a family. He talks in the show about he wanted a family, 2 kids and a dog and a pool. He's got none of them. And so he's really struggling. It's more than just a midlife crisis. This is a doctor who is really struggling, saving people's lives while he's feeling like he's losing control over his own life. And so, we start to see this sharp decline in his mental health. He has erratic behavior. This whole motorcycle trip he's taking, people are just like, okay, this can't be good. But he feels like the hospital is killing him. So these are all things that we might hear from people in our lives. It's really important to pay attention because some people are dramatic and they just want attention. But a lot of times when you say something like, my job is killing me, and you're serious, and you can feel that weight on that person. Or when they say things like, I just don't know if I want to be here, like in life anymore. Boy, those are red flags. Don't ignore those. Those are not like, oh yeah, and you're watching football, or you're watching, the housewives of whatever, and you don't have time for the person. No, you've got to pause, because those are very, very serious comments, and it shows in the show how his colleagues are taking him very seriously. And by the way, he's not the only one with burnout. We see the burnout with the nurses, we see the burnout with the residents, you know, and everybody. And hospital environments. I worked at an academic medical center, but I was on the outside of that bubble. I was more in the um, communication, marketing, thought leadership, programmatic stuff that we were doing with media and all that. I wasn't inside the belly of the beast, saving lives every day, or having to deal with not having saved a life. So even though I did get to be in some of the ER, in some of the surgeries, which was really cool, but you need that support system. Now, that is one thing that I think is really important. There is a Dr. Abbott who's kind of the essentially the colleague. It's like Dr. Robbie takes like half a day, and the other doctor comes in and takes the other half of the day, the other 17 hour shift or whatever. And it's played by Sean Hatose, who's really great. He won an Emmy for a guest appearance, but hopefully I think he becomes a main player. He was good throughout season 2, but he is suffering from PTSD. He was in the military. He still volunteers for military support, so National Guard, even though he's back now and obviously working full time at the ER. And he also lost his life. So he's gone through that depression. So this is a man who knows. He's walked the walk. And he is Dr. Robbie's best friend. And he's the one that really, I think, can get to him, because Robbie knows he gets it. He's right where I was, or he was where I am. And so anyway, so having that support system, having people who care, having people who are paying attention, having that one person who kind of has your back and it, and anything they say to you is going to be for your best interest. It's not to hurt you or criticize you or whatever. It's for your best interest. Is really, really important in life. We know, again, from the Harvard Adult Development Study, that the number one thing that makes us live longer, healthier, and happier is having quality relationships. Not a lot, just maybe a few, throughout our lives, and having one person we can turn to who will always have our back. That is the lifeline. That's the most critical. So hopefully, if we're the person feeling the depression and feeling the spiral, we have that in our lives, or hopefully you are that to someone in your life. But I also wanted to the burnout thing, I think, is really important, because even though these are professional caregivers, right? I mean, caregiver is a term now that we use for everybody who is in care. So doctors, nurses, physician's assistants, residents, and family members are all caregivers. But these professional caregivers, and particularly in the ER, they're dealing with, a lot of trauma, a lot of life issues, a lot of emotional roller coaster stuff. But so are family caregivers. Let's face it. Yeah, you may not have, next trauma coming in. Okay, every 5 minutes, somebody new is coming through the door, but you're in an ongoing roller coaster with your loved one over the traumas and the trials and the tribulations and the challenges and the changes that are happening with your loved one on a day-to-day basis. And you're in it for a long time. You're not just there for a few minutes. You might be living with the person, or you might be feeling like you are there all the time, even though you are living with your family in another home or whatever. But here are the statistics. So 46 to 50% of hospital workers, so that would be the people in the pit, are suffering from burnout in the latest surveys that were just taken in 2025. Now that's up 32% since 2018. So COVID had a lot to do with it. COVID pushed everybody to the wall. A lot of people left. We already knew we had a nursing shortage. to take care of all the older adults that will need any type of emergency care or even, doctor care. So we're dealing with that. And a lot of people left the healthcare profession during COVID. They just couldn't take it anymore. You hit a wall and sometimes you just can't keep going. So, but a home care worker, so that's somebody who's coming in maybe to your home to help care for your loved one, or it could be a staff member at a senior community residential community. They have 67% burnout rates. Okay, so higher than the hospital rates that we're seeing, 67%, right? So that's pretty significant. And it is, again, another reason for a lot of turnover in those two sectors of long-term care, both home care and senior living, because again, they just can't take it. They've got to leave. They've got to move on and do something else because of the burnout rates, right? And then finally, we come to family caregivers, 72 to 80%, the highest of any category are family members. And a lot of it is because we weren't prepared. We aren't trained like these other people are trained. We're dealing with someone who's so dear to our hearts and near to our hearts. So the emotional part of the burnout, which is really the biggest part of burnout, is huge. And the impact to the rest of our life, maybe it's our career or our job that we love. Maybe it's not having enough time for your kids. Maybe it's not spending enough time with your spouse or partner. Maybe it's dealing with a difficult parent. All of those emotions that the doctors really don't have to deal with. They don't know this person, They're just trying to get them fixed up and get them sent off to surgery or sent home or whatever it is, what we used to call, I hate to say it, in the medical community was treat and street. But they're not getting as emotionally. Now, of course, in the drama of the Pitt, we do see sometimes they get very involved with their patients, but they really do struggle with that. And they do try to keep that wall a little bit because otherwise they'd all be, down for the count. But the family caregivers can't do that. You can't put that wall up and pretend you don't care and pretend that, all these changes and all these difficulties and challenges and stuff are not hurting our heart and dragging us down maybe a little bit. So I just wanted to tell you about burnout. The other thing to know about burnout is very often, as I said, it's more emotional than physical, typically. Even though the fatigue, the lack of sleep, the lack of good nutrition, or the lack of any kind of movement and exercise are contributing to the burnout for sure. But it does tend to be a little bit more on the emotional side. And part of it is that we don't know how to deal with change and we have no control over the change. That creates fear and anxiety and depression, right? Those things then just weigh on you, creating this burnout. And also, sometimes it's about feeling valued. Is what I'm doing really important? Um, am I doing it right? Am I forgetting myself? Am I forgetting my other loved ones who need my attention as well? So the guilt and the grief and all of those are mixed in with all of this stuff, and that's where the burnout really comes from. So this is why respite, which is getting a break, whether it's from a sister, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, somebody who can give you a break. So you can go take a walk, do a bike ride, get a pedicure, get your hair done, go to a movie, go on date night with your husband or partner or whomever. Make sure you make it to your kid's soccer game because he's going to kick, that winning soccer goal. Those are really important times to turn to our circle of care. And that is the only way to really combat burnout. If you are doing this in isolation, and I mean doing caregiving in isolation, because caregivers often say, I feel all alone. If that's truly how you're feeling, We need to help you bring yourself back into balance by bringing more people into your circle of care who can take some of the burden off of you, whether it's the paperwork, whether it's dealing with the doctors, whether it's, making sure that mom's safe and okay and has a companion during the day while you're working. Whatever it is that we can get you some help, that is what we need to focus on. And that is where we start to bring you out of that darkness and back into the lightness. And again, if you are feeling to the point, because there was a really shocking study that was done, and I'm gonna do a shout out to Alexandra Drane of ARCHAngels. She was on our podcast, and we're gonna have those links. I don't have it in front of me, the notes. I think she was on season 3, but we'll have it for you so you can, and we'll have it on the screen so you can go listen to that. She is really one who's doing a lot of research and a lot of the polls and the indexing and having caregivers take, these polls that she has that show where the burnout rates are. During COVID, she was finding that 52% of family caregivers had suicidal ideation. That's that's frightening. It's sad to me. It's frightening. We can't have that. We need to help you. We need to get you to a point where you can get through this. You can build that resilience. You can know that you can keep going, and make all of this worthwhile for you. So make sure that you reach out for that help. And as I said, if you don't have the person or persons in your care circle in your life that you can turn to now, at least call 988. Talk to someone. Even just talking it through is a huge lift of the burden that you're suffering from. So we want to make sure that we get you help. And there was a hopeful ending, because I always like to leave you with a positive note. So at the end of the season finale season 2 for the Pitt, there was a little baby that was abandoned. An infant in the NICU was abandoned. And so they're trying to figure out, child services, how do they help this beautiful little baby? And Dr. Nobi goes into where she's being held and picks her up. And he says, I got abandoned too when I was 8, but I got through all that, and so will you. I got a good feeling you're going to be just fine. Everything's going to be just fine. And then he ends it by saying, you've got so many wonderful things to see and so many people to love ahead of you. It's going to be okay. So, there you go. I think Dr. Robbie, I'm sorry, I keep saying I think he's going to be okay. At least that's hopeful to me, but we know there'll be a season 3, so we'll be seeing him again. But that's a good note for all of us to think about. There are people to love in our future. There's people to love today. We have to keep going for both ourselves and for them, and we have to find the support that we need in order to do that. So, thanks for listening. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club Newscast this week. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content, our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club On Air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiver Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherri and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.